In this video, I'm going through every single Treyarch Zombies map and figuring out which one is the scariest. With that being said, let's just jump right into this. In my opinion, the least scary Zombies map of all time goes to Ascension. Once you turn the power switch on, the map turns into a completely light and colorful atmosphere with essentially no scary aspects throughout it. That's why it takes the 31st place on this list. Moving on to our 30th place, we have Firebase Z. This map is once again very bright with minimal horror or scary themes throughout it. The only scary part of the map is the jump scare that takes place during an Easter egg step later on. Coming up next is Alpha Omega, taking up the 29th place on this list. Next up on the list is Revelations. Once again, this map isn't really scary, but rather it's just downright weird. Rather than having horror aspects, Revelations zones in on having creepy tentacle monsters flying around in the sky. That's why it ends up at my 28th place on this list. Drazendrach takes up the 27th place on this list, being only a little bit scarier than Revelations. I'd also say that Shadows of Evil falls just above Drazendrach, as it's not really a scary map. The major thing that gives it a creepy ambience is the history behind the individual characters of the map. They all have very dark pasts, which could be seen as a little bit creepy. Die Rise takes up my 25th place on this list, with the major creepy part of the map just being Richtofen's voice constantly talking to you. D Machine comes in and swoops up the 24th place, only having a slightly scarier ambience than Die Rise. This is mostly due to the bunker underground. Call of the Dead takes away the 23rd place, having a slightly creepy atmosphere, being located in the Siberian tundra. The scariest part of the map is definitely George Romero chasing you with his big metal stick. Tiger Totem is pretty much the exact same as Call of the Dead, just a little bit different as it is a remake. That's why it falls on my 22nd place on this list. Although it's one of the most aesthetically pleasing maps in all of COD Zombies history, Shangri-La still has its creepy parts throughout. Pretty much anytime you aren't on the above ground part of the map, it can have a very disturbing feeling. When you're walking through the tunnels, you might find bodies or dead pigs scattered throughout just to scare you a little bit. Forsaken falls at the 20th place on the list since it's not known for being overly scary, yet it's not a super bright or friendly map either. To be honest, I'm not exactly sure why Moon landed this high on the list, but we're just gonna run with it. Grad Covey once again isn't an over-the-top scary map, but it's just far enough scary to the point that it has a level of creepy ambience to it. It just feels eerie when you're walking throughout the map at different areas. Playing the map Origins in and of itself isn't really too much of a creepy experience. The scary part of the map to me has always came from the loading screen jump scares. Also, I find Samantha's voice to be a little bit creepy from time to time. Moving on to Ancient Evil, which is mostly scary due to the darkness spread throughout the map, as well as the lore which is clearly seen anywhere you walk. 9 takes up the 15th place, pretty much just being a little scarier than Ancient Evil. Darius is one of the first maps on this list to actually be considered relatively horror themed. First of all, it's on World at War, which was naturally more of a scary game. Alongside this, it takes place in an abandoned facility, which causes for some very eerie moments throughout the map. The map has a way of making you feel like you're entirely isolated and alone from the world, and that can just get very creepy. Shinonoma once again has a very similar eerie feeling to Darius, but the thought of being alone in a swamp facility just amplifies it a lot. That's what makes it fall above Darius in my ranking, since you're literally lost in the swamp in the middle of nowhere in a tiny little hut. Voyager Spirit comes in and takes it with the 12th place on the list, pretty much just because it's like the Titanic from hell. Walking around the map just seems pretty creepy with the blood everywhere and the zombies chasing you. Now, at a first glance, you would never assume 5 to be a creepy zombies map at all. The map is super bright and doesn't appear to be creepy at all. Once you advance through the map though, and you go to the laboratory, is when you start to get an eerie feeling. The different experiments that are happening in the lab are just downright creepy, and that is why it takes up the 11th place on my list. Transit takes up the 10th place as the scariest zombies map due to things like the denizens clawing your eyes out and just the feeling of being in a post-apocalyptic world. Transit is one of the only Black Ops 2 maps that actually feels like it takes place in a post-apocalyptic world, which is perfect for the ambience. Martyr Totem is only slightly scarier than Transit due to the constant dark atmosphere that it brings. Like literally every section of this map is completely dark and it's just spooky. Kino Totem is very similar to Darius, being that it's in an abandoned location. Personally, I feel like Kino just does a way better job of making an eerie abandoned location work, which is why it places this much higher on my list than Darius at number 15. Dead of the Night is just one of those maps that's just borderline a little scarier than Kino Totem. Zetsubo no Shima is a zombies map known as the Island of Despair. Walking around any part of this map definitely gives you an uneasy feeling, and that's why this takes up the 6th place on my list. Also, pretty much anything on this map, from the crashers to the evil spiders, is pretty creepy. Buried comes in and takes up the 5th place on my list for multiple reasons. It's an abandoned underground ghost town haunted by the ghost of Sarah Faraday. It might not actually be that scary, but when I was younger, I never went through the house because I was always scared of the ghosts. So it kind of just lands a special place in my heart where I was always terrified of the map. Moving on to Blood of the Dead, which is a map littered with skulls, dead bodies, and areas that look like ritual zones. The atmosphere on this map, as well as the soundtrack alike, can make for an absolutely terrifying experience if it's your first time playing. Mob of the Dead is literally Blood of the Dead, but the scary parts of the map are just amplified, and that's why it takes up the 3rd place on my list. Moving on to an OG Nocturne Totem. This is a map that never fails to make you feel like you're alone, as it's set in a bunker in the middle of nowhere that is getting swarmed by the undead. Alongside the physicals of the map, the sounds and soundtrack of the map also bring more of an uneasy feeling. I guarantee almost everyone that booted up zombies for this first time and loaded up Nocturne Totem had a little uneasy feeling at this horror game mode. Verac takes up the 1st place as the scariest zombies map of all time. The map is set in an abandoned asylum that shows signs of torture everywhere scattered throughout the walls. The walls are covered covered in blood, the morgue is missing bodies, and you can hear the screams of innocent children throughout the entire map. For these reasons and many more is why Verac is the scariest zombies map of all time. Thank you guys for watching, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.